The silver rays of dawn crept over the horizon as Nora Beaumont stood on the dusty trail with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small cloth bundle of belongings. The year was 1876, and the 23-year-old woman had just walked 15 miles from the town that no longer welcomed her. Her once auburn hair had inexplicably turned completely gray over the course of a single winter, a transformation that had set the superstitious townsfolk of Silver Creek, Colorado territory, to whispering about witchcraft and bad omens. Nora wiped the sweat from her brow with a handkerchief, squinting at the expanse of open country before her. The nearest town was Redemption, a small but growing cattle settlement that she hoped would be more accepting of a young woman with old woman's hair. She adjusted her simple blue cotton dress, her only good one, saved for the church services that she would no longer be attending in Silver Creek. "You bring nothing but misfortune," the town elder had told her just yesterday, his face set in stone as the rest of the town council nodded in agreement. First the drought, then the fever that took the Miller children, now the cattle dying. "It ain't natural for a girl your age to gray like winter snow. It ain't right," Nora had protested, tears streaming down her face, but the decision had been made. The town that had been her home since she was orphaned at 12 would no longer have her. Not even Mrs. Wilkins, who had taken her in all those years ago, would speak in her defense, too frightened of being ostracized herself. The sun climbed higher as Nora continued walking. Her throat was parched, and her leather boots, worn thin at the soles, offered little protection against the rocky trail. She was considering stopping to rest beneath a scraggly cottonwood when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind. Fear clutched at her heart. Had someone from Silver Creek come to ensure she truly left the county? She stepped off the trail, half hiding behind the cottonwood tree, her hand clutching the small knife in her pocket, her only protection. A lone rider appeared, a tall man atop a chestnut mare. His broad-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see he wore the practical clothes of a working cattleman, not the fine suit of a town elder or the dusty garments of a drifter. The man slowed his horse as he approached, clearly having spotted her despite her attempt to hide. "Morning, miss," he called out, his voice deep but gentle. "You all right out here on your own?" Nora hesitated, her fingers tightening around the knife handle. "Just passing through," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The man brought his horse to a halt and pushed his hat back, revealing a face that was sun-weathered but kind, with alert blue eyes that studied her with concern rather than suspicion. He couldn't have been more than 28 or 29. "Passing through to where, if you don't mind my asking? There's nothing but open country for miles." "Redemption," she answered after a moment. "I'm headed to Redemption." The man nodded, a slight frown creasing his brow. "That's a fair piece to walk, especially in this heat." His eyes flicked to her small bundle, then back to her face, taking in her gray hair but making no comment on it. "I'm headed that way myself. My ranch is just outside town, name's Henry Prescott." Nora remained silent, wary of kindness that might turn once he realized what the people of Silver Creek believed about her. Henry dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Look, miss, I can see you're in some kind of trouble. I don't mean to pry, but a lady walking alone out here. It ain't safe. Bandits, wild animals, the elements, any one of them could be the end of you." "I'll take my chances," Nora replied, though her parched lips and aching feet disagreed vehemently. Henry sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "At least let me offer you some water. And my mare, Belle here, she's strong enough to carry us both to town if you'd accept the help." Nora's instinct for survival finally won out over her mistrust. "Water would be most appreciated." He handed her a canteen and she drank deeply, the cool liquid a blessing on her dry throat. When she tried to hand it back, he shook his head. "Keep it for now, you need it more than I do." "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." "Henry, please." He studied her for a moment longer. "And you are Nora Beaumont." "Well, Miss Beaumont, what do you say to that ride? I promise you'll be safe." I've got a sister back east who'd tan my hide if she knew I left a lady to walk all that way in this heat." Nora looked down the long, dusty trail, then back at Henry Prescott. There was something in his eyes that spoke of honesty, a directness that was different from the shifty looks the townspeople had been giving her these past months. "All right," she agreed finally, "but just to the outskirts of Redemption." Henry helped her onto Belle, then mounted behind her, careful to maintain a proper distance as much as the saddle would allow. As they rode, Nora found herself relaxing slightly, the rhythmic motion of the horse and the solid presence of Henry at her back providing an unexpected sense of security. "So what takes you to Redemption?" he asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. Nora tensed. "A fresh start," she said simply, "running from something or toward something. Both, perhaps." Henry didn't press further, and Nora was grateful. They rode on, the vast landscape of the Colorado Territory stretching around them, mountains in the distance and rolling plains on either side. After an hour, Henry began pointing out landmarks, a particular rock formation, the bend in a creek where the fishing was good, a distant cluster of trees that marked the boundary of his property. "You know this land well," Nora observed. "Been here 8 years now. Came out after the war looking for something. I don't know, something that wasn't covered in blood and smoke. Found this piece of heaven instead. You fought in the war, Union cavalry. Too young to understand what I was getting into, old enough to carry the scars." Nora nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. She had lost her father to that same war, though she kept this to herself. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the outline of Redemption came into view, a collection of wooden buildings with a church steeple rising above them, nestled in a valley with mountains as a backdrop. "There she is," Henry said. "Not much to look at, but she's growing. Got a general store, a hotel, 2 saloons, though I'd recommend avoiding the rusty spur, a doctor's office, and a schoolhouse." "Is there work to be had?" Nora asked, her practical concerns coming to the fore now that their destination was in sight. "Depends on what you can do." "Can you read and write?" "Yes, quite well. I also sew, cook, and I've some experience with bookkeeping." "Well then," Henry said, sounding pleased, "you shouldn't have much trouble. The hotel might be hiring, or the general store. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the hotel, is always complaining about needing help." They rode into town just as the lamplighters were beginning their rounds, bringing a warm glow to the windows and streets of Redemption. People nodded greetings to Henry as they passed, and he returned them with easy familiarity. Nora was acutely aware of the curious glances directed at her and her prematurely gray hair, but there was none of the hostility she had grown accustomed to in Silver Creek. Henry guided Belle to the hotel, a 2-story wooden building with a sign that read Patterson House. He dismounted and then helped Nora down, his strong hands gentle at her waist. "Mrs. Patterson is a good woman," he told her as they stood before the hotel. "Tough but fair. If you mention my name, she'll treat you right." Nora clutched her bundle to her chest. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Prescott? You don't know anything about me." Henry looked at her thoughtfully. "I know enough. I know you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. Sometimes that's all that matters." He paused, then added with a gentle smile, "And it's still Henry." Nora felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Thank you, Henry." "My pleasure, Miss Beaumont." "Nora," she corrected him, surprising herself. His smile widened. "Nora, then." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken passing between them before Henry cleared his throat. "I should be getting on home. My foreman will be wondering what's kept me." "Of course." Nora took a step toward the hotel entrance, then turned back. "Will I see you again? I'm in town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps we'll cross paths." With a tip of his hat, Henry mounted Belle and rode off down the street, leaving Nora standing before the hotel with a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, eyed Nora skeptically when she inquired about a room and possibly employment. But at the mention of Henry Prescott's name, her expression softened slightly. "Henry's a good man," she said. "Best rancher in these parts and fair in his dealings. If he vouched for you, that's something." Her eyes lingered on Nora's gray hair. Unusual coloring for one so young. Nora braced herself for the whispers, the accusations, but Mrs. Patterson merely shrugged. "My husband went gray at 25, said it was from putting up with me." A rare smile crossed her face at the memory. "Room's 50 cents a night, but if you're willing to help with the cleaning and serving, we can work out an arrangement." Relief washed over Nora. "I'd be most grateful, Mrs. Patterson. Don't thank me yet. The work's hard and the Cowboys can be a handful, especially on paydays, but they know better than to cross me in my own establishment." That night, in a small but clean room on the second floor of Patterson House, Nora lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of redemption piano music drifting from one of the saloons, occasional bursts of laughter, the creak of the building settling. Her mind kept returning to Henry Prescott, the kindness in his eyes, and the way he had looked at her gray hair without a hint of superstition or disgust. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without tears on her pillow. The next few days were a whirlwind of work as Nora settled into her role at the hotel. She cleaned rooms, served meals in the small dining room, and helped Mrs. Patterson with the accounts. The older woman was a demanding employer, but recognized Nora's education and capabilities, gradually entrusting her with more responsibilities. The townspeople of Redemption were curious about the young woman with the old woman's hair, but their curiosity seemed benign compared to the suspicion she had faced in Silver Creek. When asked, she simply said she had always been this way, and most accepted the explanation without question. In a frontier town where people came to reinvent themselves, a peculiarity like premature gray hair was hardly the most unusual thing they had encountered. Saturday arrived, and with it, the promise of seeing Henry again. Nora found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her long gray hair into a neat chignon and wearing her blue dress freshly laundered and pressed. Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look, but said nothing as Nora bustled about her morning chores with unusual energy. The general store across the street became her frequent observation point as she watched for Henry's arrival. It was mid-morning when she finally spotted him riding into town, Belle's chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight. Henry was accompanied by another man, presumably his foreman, and they headed straight for the general store. Nora busied herself with sweeping the hotel porch, her heart racing as she tried to appear nonchalant. When Henry emerged from the store, his eyes immediately sought out the hotel, and when he saw her, his face broke into a wide smile. He said something to his foreman, who nodded and continued loading supplies onto a pack mule, then crossed the street toward her. "Miss Beaumont," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You're looking well. I trust Mrs. Patterson hasn't worked you too hard." "Not at all," Nora replied, conscious of the heat in her cheeks. "She's been very fair." "Glad to hear it." Henry glanced toward the hotel entrance. "Would it be improper to ask if you might join me for coffee? The cafe down the street makes a decent brew." Nora hesitated, looking back at the hotel. "I should ask Mrs. Patterson first. I'm still on duty." "Of course." Mrs. Patterson, surprisingly, gave her blessing with minimal fuss. "Go on, girl. It's been all work and no play for you since you arrived. Half an hour won't ruin us." The cafe was a small, cozy establishment with checkered tablecloths and windows that looked out onto the main street. As they settled at a table with their coffee, Nora felt a strange mix of nervousness and ease in Henry's company. "How are you finding Redemption?" he asked. "It's kinder than where I came from," she admitted. "People here seem to mind their own business more." Henry nodded. "Frontier towns tend to judge a person by what they do, not what they look like or where they came from. Everyone's got a past they'd rather leave behind. Even you." The question slipped out before she could stop it. Henry's eyes grew distant for a moment. "Even me." "The war left marks on all of us who fought, some visible, some not." Nora took a sip of her coffee, finding comfort in its warmth and bitterness. "I was cast out of Silver Creek," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if they had a will of their own. "My hair turned gray over the winter, and they said it was an evil omen. They blamed me for every misfortune, drought, sickness, dying livestock." Henry's expression darkened. "Superstitious nonsense." "They were afraid," Nora said, surprising herself by defending the very people who had driven her away. "Fear makes people cruel. That it does." Henry reached across the table, his hand coming to rest near hers but not quite touching. "For what it's worth, I think your hair is beautiful." Like silver in the sunlight. Nora felt her breath catch. No one had ever described her condition in such terms before. Silver, yes, silver, precious and rare. His eyes held hers, earnest and warm, not gray at all. In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection forming that transcended their brief acquaintance. Nora found herself smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in months. Their half-hour stretched to nearly an hour as they talked of books they had read, places they had seen, and dreams they still harbored. Henry spoke of his ranch, the struggles and joys of building something from nothing. Nora shared her love of teaching, a path she had hoped to pursue before her circumstances changed. "You know, redemption's growing," Henry said as they finally prepared to leave. "The schoolhouse only has one teacher for all the children. Miss Winters was just saying last Sunday that she could use an assistant." Hope fluttered in Nora's chest. "Do you think she would consider someone like me?" "I think she would be a fool not to." Henry paid for their coffee and escorted Nora back to the hotel. At the entrance, he hesitated. "I'll be back in town next Saturday. Perhaps you might allow me to call on you properly." Nora felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I would like that very much." With a tip of his hat and a smile that stayed with her long after he had gone, Henry departed. Nora returned to her duties at the hotel with a lightness in her step that did not go unnoticed by Mrs. Patterson. "That Prescott boy's taken a shine to you," the older woman observed as they prepared the dining room for supper. "We're merely acquaintances," Nora demurred. Hum. Mrs. Patterson's knowing look spoke volumes. "Well, you could do worse. He's got a good head on his shoulders and a kind heart, that one. Doesn't let the fact that he's becoming one of the wealthiest ranchers in the county go to his head, either." Nora almost dropped the plates she was carrying. "Wealthy? Henry started with practically nothing 8 years ago. Now the Prescott Ranch runs more cattle than any other spread in the county. Man works hard and smart." Mrs. Patterson eyed her shrewdly. "But I suspect it's not his bank account that's caught your interest." Nora couldn't deny it. It was Henry's kindness, his lack of judgment about her appearance, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled that had drawn her to him. The following week passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Nora visited the schoolhouse and met Miss Winters, a harried but dedicated woman in her 30s, who brightened considerably at the prospect of an assistant with proper education. By Friday, arrangements had been made for Nora to begin helping with the younger children 3 mornings a week while continuing her duties at the hotel. Saturday dawned clear and mild, a perfect late summer day. Nora woke early, filled with a nervous energy she could scarcely contain. She would see Henry today. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to hope for anything resembling happiness, let alone romance. Henry arrived at 2 o'clock precisely, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. He brought her wildflowers, a simple but touching gesture that made Nora's heart flutter. "I thought we might take a walk," he suggested. "The weather's fine, and there's a spot by the river that's peaceful this time of day." Mrs. Patterson gave them a stern reminder about propriety, but allowed Nora the afternoon off. They strolled through town and out along a path that followed the river, talking easily about their week. Henry listened intently as Nora described her new position at the school, his genuine interest in her aspirations touching her deeply. The spot by the river, was indeed peaceful, a grassy bank shaded by cottonwoods, with the water flowing gently past. They sat on a fallen log, close but not too close, mindful of the proper distance between a man and woman who were not engaged or related. "I've been thinking about you all week," Henry admitted, his voice low and sincere. "I know it's forward of me to say so, given that we've only just met, but I feel as though I've known you much longer." Nora's heart raced. "I've thought of you too," she confessed, her gaze dropping to her hands folded in her lap. "You've shown me such kindness when I needed it most." "It's not just kindness, Nora." Henry reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "There's something about you that calls to me, your strength, your dignity in the face of injustice. The way you look at the world with hope despite what you've endured." Nora looked up, meeting his gaze. "I was beginning to forget what hope felt like until I met you." The afternoon passed in a haze of conversation and cautious touches, hands brushing, shoulders occasionally meeting. They spoke of deeper things now, Henry's nightmares from the war, Nora's loneliness after being orphaned. With each confidence shared, the bond between them strengthened. As the sun began to set, Henry reluctantly suggested they return to town. They walked back slowly, neither wanting the day to end. At the hotel entrance, Henry took both her hands in his. "May I call on you again tomorrow after church?" Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Henry hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a chaste kiss on her cheek. "Until tomorrow, then." Nora floated through her evening chores, Mrs. Patterson's knowing smirk barely registering. That night, she brushed her silver hair before the small mirror in her room, seeing it through Henry's eyes for the first time, not as a curse or an aberration, but as something precious and beautiful. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Henry would come to town on Saturdays, sometimes staying through Sunday. They would walk, talk, and gradually learn the contours of each other's hearts and minds. Nora flourished in her dual roles at the school and hotel, earning the respect of the townspeople who had initially viewed her with curiosity. The first time Henry invited her to visit his ranch, nearly a month after their first meeting, Mrs. Patterson insisted on propriety. "You'll take my niece Abigail as chaperone, or you won't be going at all," she declared. So it was that Nora found herself riding in Henry's wagon on a crisp autumn day, with 15-year-old Abigail sitting between them, chattering excitedly about the adventure. The Prescott Ranch sprawled across a valley with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and pastures filled with cattle. It was impressive without being ostentatious, practical yet comfortable. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed as they approached. "It's home," Henry said simply. "Or at least, it's becoming home." His foreman, Samuel, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Cruz, welcomed them warmly. Mrs. Cruz had prepared a feast, and they dined in a dining room with large windows that looked out over the valley. After the meal, Henry showed them around the property, pride evident in his voice as he explained the improvements he had made and his plans for the future. When they reached the small grove of apple trees behind the house, Abigail conveniently became fascinated by a butterfly, wandering just far enough away to give them a moment of privacy while remaining in sight. "What do you think?" Henry asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Of the ranch, I mean." "I think you've built something wonderful here," Nora replied honestly. "Something lasting." Henry stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "It needs something though, someone." Nora's breath caught as she realized what he was saying. "Henry." "I know it's soon," he said quickly. "Too soon, perhaps, by conventional standards, but out here life doesn't always allow for long courtships. I know my own mind, Nora Beaumont, and my heart too." He took her hands in his touch sending warmth through her despite the autumn chill. "I love you. I love your kindness, your resilience, your silver hair that shines in the sunlight like a blessing rather than a curse. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, blurring her vision. "Are you certain?" "The townspeople in Silver Creek, they said—" "I don't give a damn what they said," Henry interrupted, his voice fierce. Superstitious fools, the lot of them. I know you, Nora. I've seen your heart. That's all that matters to me. A tear slipped down Nora's cheek. I love you too, she whispered. I never thought I would find this, not after. Henry released one of her hands to gently wipe away her tear. Will you marry me, Nora? Will you make this house a home with me? Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will. His smile was radiant as he leaned forward and kissed her. A proper kiss this time, sweet and promising. Abigail's delighted squeal from nearby reminded them they weren't truly alone, and they broke apart, laughing. The engagement was announced the following Sunday after church services. The townspeople of Redemption offered their congratulations with genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, muttering about young people rushing into things while simultaneously planning an elaborate wedding breakfast. 2 weeks later, as October painted the countryside in gold and crimson, Nora stood in the back of Redemption's small church, clutching a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers and autumn leaves. The blue dress she wore was new, a gift from Mrs. Patterson, who had insisted that no girl of mine is getting married in a work dress. The church was filled with townspeople and ranch hands, all turned expectantly toward her as the pianist played the wedding march. At the altar stood Henry, his face solemn but his eyes shining with love as she walked toward him. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken with clear voices and full hearts. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at Patterson House was joyful, with music and dancing spilling out into the street as the entire town joined in marking the happy occasion. When it was time for the newlyweds to depart for the ranch, their home now, the women gathered to wish Nora well, many embracing her with genuine affection. Mrs. Patterson held her the longest. You deserve this happiness, child, she whispered fiercely. Don't you ever forget that. Tears threatened again as Nora hugged the woman who had become a surrogate mother to her. Thank you for everything. As Henry helped her into the wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by his mischievous ranch hands, the setting sun caught her hair, turning it to molten silver. Henry paused, gazing at her with wonder. Have I told you today how beautiful you are, Mrs. Prescott? Nora's heart swelled with happiness at the sound of her new name. I believe you mentioned it once or twice. Well, it bears repeating. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, nodding farewell to the well-wishers. As they pulled away, he leaned close to whisper in her ear, I thank God every day for the silver in your hair that brought you to me. Nora laid her head on his shoulder, feeling truly at peace for the first time in longer than she could remember. And I thank God for the man who saw it as silver, not gray. The wagon rolled out of town and toward the mountains, toward home, toward their future together, a future bright with promise and love, unburdened by superstition and fear, rich with the silver blessings of acceptance and understanding. Over the years that followed, the Prescott Ranch prospered, as did the family that called it home. Nora continued teaching at the Redemption Schoolhouse, eventually becoming the headmistress when Miss Winters retired. Her silver hair remained her most distinctive feature, but in Redemption, it became known as a mark of wisdom rather than misfortune. 2 years after their wedding, Nora gave birth to twins, a boy with his father's sandy hair and a girl whose first wisps of hair came in silver like her mother's. The sight of it filled Henry not with dread but with joy, another precious gift from the woman he loved. Silver, he would tell his daughter as she grew, running his fingers through her unusual locks, precious and rare, just like you, just like your mother. And in time, the legend grew in Redemption and beyond of the silver-haired schoolmistress, and the cowboy who loved her, a love story that taught an entire community that beauty and blessings often come disguised as differences, that what some cast out as strange, others treasure as extraordinary. For in the wild expanse of the Colorado Territory, where life was harsh and often short, Henry and Nora Prescott had found something rare, indeed a love as enduring as the mountains, as precious as silver, and as transformative as the frontier itself.